as per the last day, we have specific objectives of building communication capacity, but also actually trying to develop some strategies, which we hope to try to actually implement early next year, along with the rollout of the Grenada NEA. All right, so yesterday, I keep saying yesterday, Tuesday, we did the ABCs of communication. Today, we're focusing on data aspects, which Michelle will talk about, and later sessions will address implementation tools, talking about developing your teams, timing and resources, looking at some M&E, and then the last session, we're trying to see how we can actually put this thing to work early next year. All right, we have some possible campaign topics, which I explained in the last meeting, and we actually did a survey to see which topics folks wanted to join, because these are the topics you'll be working on as a group for the next today and the next 4 sessions towards developing a communication strategies. So there was about a bit of a split between folks who were interested in talking to farmers about retaining or planting trees on their farmlands to aid in water security and to aid in soil erosion. Now, those are just very broad topics put in by me in not so good messaging. But the idea, of course, is during this project, we try to pick out the key messages we want. The second topic that people are keen on is talking about mangroves, with a particular emphasis on trying to make sure our decision/policy makers understand their value and help work with them to try to protect them. There was less interest in sand mining, but we still have it there as a possible topic. Someone had suggested one more possible topic on plastic recycling, and also a little bit of a lament in the survey about, you know, we need more practical action. So just to say, if that person has joined us, we acknowledge the need for practical action on aspects like plastic recycling. But I think we won't be able to do that under this workshop, as we don't really have a lot of data to support plastic related matters within the NEA. So with that, I'm asking you to do a couple of things. If you already filled out the survey yesterday and the day before, that's fine. You need to do nothing else. You've already been assigned to a breakout group. If, for example, you're only joining today and would like to now choose a group, just put in the chat which of the 3 groups that you would like to be on. So as we said, we're definitely going to do the mangrove group and the one about trees on farms, because there was a lot of interest in both of those. We're trying to see if more people are interested in sand mining, and if we don't get many more folks joining that one, we'll just do the 2 groups that I mentioned before, the mangrove. So what I want you to do, we're not going to wait for you all to do this, but within the next 10 minutes, please put your name, well, I think your name will come up anyway, and which group you'd like to work on if you didn't already fill out the survey. Okay, and then we'll let you all know how we're proceeding in about 10 minutes in terms of the breakout groups. I think the first breakout group might be about half an hour away or so. All right, so if you guys can just go ahead and do that in the chat if you didn't fill out the survey. And while you all are doing that, I am turning over back to Michelle. Thanks very much. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thanks, Natalie. Good morning, everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. Just give me a moment to share my screen. You know, from Tuesday, I'm a little slow on the share screen front. But I am just trying to pull up the slides for today for you. Okay, so I hope everyone is, oh, sorry. I hope everyone is well. This morning, I wanted to start not knowing if we would have some new additions today with a brief reminder of our community agreements, and then to ask again if anyone had anything to add. So our community agreements that everyone gave me a thumbs up for on Tuesday were, let's agree to do the following in order to maximize our class time. Let's participate actively or fully by sharing our experiences and or answering questions. Limiting our contributions to 2 to 3 minutes in plenary discussions when possible to allow everyone to actively participate, limiting distractions near us. I was not so great at that Tuesday, but I'm hoping to be better with it today. Communicating when we have to step away from our computers, especially in the small group breakout. So last session we only had one small group breakout, but today we have two. And so when you're in breakout, if you're not going to be, if something comes up and you have to be away from your computer, please do tell the people in your group that you've stepped away so they're not waiting and or trying to engage you while you are not present. Next is listening to our colleagues for understanding, being respectful even when we disagree. Is there anything else we need to add? Anyone? I'm not seeing anything in the chat, and I don't think anyone has raised their hand or unmuted. Oh, well, some people are not muted, but I'm not sure if that means you would like to respond. Oh, okay. So in that case, I think we can move ahead if there are no additions to the community agreements. On tap for today, we're going to deal with strategic targeting, crafting key messages, and we're going to have an experience share from Omar Mohammed, the executive director of the Cropper Foundation, and he will be sharing with us about one of his projects and how they have leveraged and used data to strengthen or bolster their communications efforts to advance a cause. Yeah. So we're gonna jump straight in with strategic targeting. And a little.
Hi, Michelle. Sorry. Do you mind before you get into that? I know you're going to start the work. I actually think there's a comment that I would like to address in the chat. And then
Sure.
there's also, I think everybody has put in their group preferences. We do not have a critical mass to do the sand mining group. So we're just going to do the two groups, the mangroves and the trees/farms one. And Crystal and Melissa, you know what that means for you in terms of the background logistics. I also would just like to point to a comment made by Ian. Ian, we did note, and I acknowledged it actually in a slide, that there was a topic suggested in terms of plastic recycling. I only saw one avenue. I actually think we may have gotten a bit mixed up about who was actually asking it, but we did note it in a slide. I don't know if you saw that slide earlier. And just to say that there isn't enough of a number like the sand mining, plus we don't really have the data within the NEA to support it, which is what we're trying to do. So thank you very much for the suggestion. I also understand and appreciate the comment that you made and the frustration in terms of not a lot being done in terms of recycling, littering, dumping, etc. So just want to say we heard you, we acknowledged you. Okay, thanks. I do see a comment, sorry, a hand up. That would be from, who is it? Sorry, I'm actually not seeing
Aria,
it.
Me.
Yes, Aria, please go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, and I apologize for joining a little bit late. I also had done this survey and asked for a member of parliament via 1, a letter signed by many persons, and 2, a follow-up visit after the letter was sent on recognizing that conservation and wise use of Tri-Island State ecosystems should be high priority on their priority list for both coastal and marine ecosystems. I didn't realize at the time that this decision would be made now, but I wanted to raise it because environment has received over the past like 18 months a lot of concerns and requests for support on how to approach MPs, whether your representative is actually a minister or not, to lobby for specific conservation issues. So I'm highlighting that for possible consideration as well, even though I apologize that it would have come late.
Okay, so, all right, I apologize from our end. Maybe we didn't see the last set. I think we had cut off, stated as a cutoff of late that evening or something. So
right, I think it was
apologies
midday
if, right.
on Wednesday,
So,
midday Wednesday. So I
right,
apologize too.
so we didn't look at it. Can
And we may
you
not have
put,
critical mass. I understand
yeah,
that too.
yeah. Can you put the type the topic in specifically though? But I really don't think we might get critical mass. I will leave it open for a little bit in case anybody very rapidly suggests that they want to be a part of it. But given the not so high numbers we have, I doubt we can accommodate it. Not that we can't, but it may not make sense.
Well
Prior
noted.
yeah,
Well
on
noted. And
recognizing and
again,
wise
for
use.
those of
Yeah.
us who may have issues that may not be picked up in the two main topics, I
Mhm.
hope that we'll be able to figure out and slot in our issues. So I heard what Ian had said.
Mhm.
And perhaps again, depending on where you feel strongly and where as an environmental advocate you have your issue, perhaps we can make sure that we can slot those in, you know, so we can still have it generic enough to be able to utilize that for other things other than the two specific ones. But thank you.
Also to note that, yes, we are specifically trying to develop at least 2 campaigns that we can rapidly implement when we roll out the NEA. This is also a training exercise, right? And it's also not finalized. I am kicking around ideas in the back of my head in terms of when we roll out the NEA. So we're not going to lose these 2 points, and we can see what may or may not be possible later on around early next year. Okay, so Ian and
Thank you.
Aria,
Well
I hope
noted.
that addresses your concerns. Michelle, I apologize for cutting you off, but please go right ahead.
No worries, Natalie. Obviously, people's concerns need to be addressed, and I appreciate that. So everyone feels comfortable moving forward. And I do hope, Ian and Aria, you do feel more comfortable moving forward now that Natalie has had some time to address your concerns. So on that note, we will jump right back into strategic targeting. We left off not yesterday, Tuesday, talking about what is necessary in terms of strategy and taking a strategic approach to communications. And a few of the lessons that we learned from or that we connected with our own stories were from Brandon Stanton of Humans of New York, that we need to meet our target audiences where they are, you know, being very measured in how we approach, and being cognizant of how we approach and deliberate in the way that we approach people or institutions that we would like to engage. And so on that note, we like to focus on strategic targeting for the first part of this session, and I have a few brainstorming questions to kind of get us going. What is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of strategic targeting or targeting where communications is concerned? Anyone want to chime in and share with us what comes to mind for you? feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the chat, or unmute, and tell us, because the floor is open. Nobody comfortable sharing just yet? Aditi, that's right? Because I can't see the chat.
Yes, Aria has a comment in the chat, knowing the specific interest or motivation.
Absolutely. Knowing what drives people obviously helps us better design messaging that reaches them, so that we can get our desired outcome. So if no one else wants to chime in, I've made a few notes. I think Aria touched on one. What comes to mind for me, and I think for most people, oh, my chat is, my computer's frozen a little bit, guys, are finding the right people to get, oh gosh, I'm not seeing, reaching the right people with the right messages to get the outcomes desired for the campaign, right? So that means figuring out who those people are or might be, and what messages might prove effective for them in the next step. Figuring out how we can reach them or get connected to them. Hayden, is that you, HR, in the chat? Yes, it is. Deciding on who your target audience is based on specific criteria that would lead to positive results. Absolutely. And I think we touched on that a bit yesterday, but it's definitely worth repeating. That we need to have a specific reason that we've selected people as our target audiences, and also, you know, specific criteria that help us figure out how to reach them best and motivate them to help us in the way that we need help to get our desired outcome, right? And I think we spoke yesterday about sometimes that can be, we're informing them so that they can become advocates. We are informing them so that they can, in their function of, for instance, someone in government, that so that they can push our issue forward. In some instances, we are accountable to them. So we are, and in most cases, that would be like our beneficiary communities, people who are most impacted by the issue. And so, yeah, definitely we need to be specific in our criteria and know why we are tapping specific target audiences. So next question. The toolkits define strategic targeting as clearly identifying and defining who you are trying to sway, influence, inspire to change, or persuade to help you instigate change. Why is this an important part of developing a communication strategy? Anyone want to shed some light on that for us? I have the chat open, not seeing anything in the chat, not seeing any raised hands. Any thoughts on that before I put in my 2 cents from best practice? No, it's still a little too early. Oh, Paulette says it adds to the credibility of the information you are giving. The toolkit different. Yeah. Do you want to?
If I can, sorry, if I can add as well to that, identifying who you're trying to sway and influence, you will also influence the way and the means that you use to engage with the parties. So it is important to identify those persons, understand what their interests are, what their positions are, and target your messages and your means accordingly.
Agreed. Absolutely, Adrian. Thank you for sharing. Brian shares in the chat, if you don't aim for a target, you're guaranteed to not hit it. Absolutely. So glad you said that, because that leads me to some of the notes that I have. Hayden says, it may seem an obvious point, but preferred language is an important issue. It is not obvious at all, because I think, but it is absolutely true, Hayden, that preferred language is so key, and not our preferred language, but the preferred language of our targets, right? How they receive messaging. Because I think it's natural for us to assume that most people receive messages the same way we do, especially when we are passionate about an issue. I have found in my 20 or so years, I don't want to age myself too much, in my 20 or so years working in the CSO sector, both abroad and locally here in Trinidad and regionally throughout the Caribbean, that we CSO representatives, civil society, we are really passionate about the issues that we represent. And so we expect other people to share that same passion, right? And they may, or we can win them over, but we have to start with what their values are and what means the most to them and how it impacts them, right? So it is a key point that people's preferred language and how they receive messages and what is comfortable for them and relatable for them is a critical, mission critical part of developing effective communications, one that is often glossed over. So not obvious at all, Hayden, and really glad that you raised that. Thank you. So I say here in my notes that it helps us use our resources more wisely, and have or improve the impact of our efforts. And just like Brian said, I also noted, if we're trying to reach or speak to everyone, we will end up speaking to no one. People connect to messaging that resonates with them personally for one reason or another, and strategic targeting allows us to use the information available to us to develop that messaging. It also allows for better feedback gathering, tracking, and pivoting if necessary to maximize campaign reach and effectiveness. Any other thoughts on either the notes that I've given on this or the original question, which was, why is this an important part? I'm sorry, guys, I'm so bad with this. Why is this an important part of developing an effective communications campaign? If there are no more thoughts on that, we can move forward to the next question. And this is more of a reflection question for you. I'm pretty sure that most of us have done quite a bit of work in the area of issue-based communications or communicating with audiences to have a particular impact or outcome, right? So off the top of your head, I'd like you to just take a few minutes to reflect on what are some of the groups or individuals you've targeted for communications in the past? Did you reach and sway them? What would you have done differently? What would you do again? And as we're reflecting on that, if anyone would like to share, certainly open to that. The floor is open if you would like to share your personal experience with targeting particular audiences for issue-based communications. Anyone? Let's see. Not seeing any hands or anything in the chat. So if no one wants to share with the group about their personal experiences, we certainly have a lot of time to do that as the session goes on in small group. I will move forward. Oh, Hayden says, my audiences were too large and I assumed people would get it. Epic fail. Oh, Hayden, do you want to say more? When you say your audiences were too large, who were you targeting?
Okay, so a good example is I did 2 climate strikes in Grenada, and I found out the hard way that when I was out there in the street with my placards, that not even my family was willing to join me. So that's the first part of the message, that I asked people to join me. And secondly, so many people that passed in the street were actually surprised, shocked. Some were actually upset at me for being there. And the last part of the results of that broad target of my messaging was that the local people, my people, Grenadians, were very non-receptive to my messaging. Whereas foreigners, I actually had like kids from the Netherlands, I had tourists at hotels in the area stopping by and spending time on the picket line with me. And the majority of the people who joined the strike with me were expats. So that's why I said epic fail, because they were positive outcomes, but nothing went as I had thought it would.
Wow, that is awesome. I mean, that's an awesome example to draw on. I'm sorry things didn't go as planned, but a great lesson learned in exactly what I had shared a little earlier, that, you know, sometimes we're so passionate, we think other people share our passion, but when it comes down to it, we may not be communicating with them in a way that they can understand and buy into. So that's a great lesson learned. Aria, go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you very much to Hayden for being brave enough to share on this. I do remember when he did one of the 2 specific pickets, and I remember tooting him. That one was down by Grand Anse, I think it was by the roundabout, not up by the ministry, not up by the ministerial complex. But what I wanted to share was that on my way recently to a meeting, I was on one of these extremely long transatlantic flights, and I really didn't want to watch another documentary, but I started to look at something on the astronomy, dark matter and black holes. And it was so simply explained using a very simple story that it has stuck with me continuously. That, and the guy also explained, the name of the professor was Brian Neff. No, not Brian, sorry. His name was Brian Cox, I think. Sorry, Brian. But the point was that very complex ideas in an area where I have very little knowledge, like cosmetology, about the stars, about astrophysics, about the expansion of the universe, about the Milky Way and Andromeda and black holes. These are things that I don't even have time to really look at other than casually if I happen to see them for 5 seconds. But the use of the analogies and the storytelling that was done by this professor really profoundly marked me, and as an effective way to communicate and to grab an audience and keep them. I mean, the thing was a 3-part series. I think it was something like about 7 hours, and I ended up watching the entire thing. But it was because of the fact that they really gripped you at the beginning with a really interesting story that expressed very complex ideas, but really simply and in a way that everybody could, well, I think people who are listening could identify with. Great.
Yes, thank you so much. Wow, Aria, that was a great example of really pulling people in when, you know, they don't have any knowledge on the topic, hooking them and keeping them. And that's what we're trying to help you all do in this workshop. I also would like to commend Hayden on sharing so openly. Also, Adrian. So in the chat, Adrian shares, I once had to explain the potential impacts of a water diversion project to Indigenous communities in 2 countries. We did it through village meetings, but the time allocated to build a relationship was too short. And then he also shares part of the issue was the communication of scientific and engineering information, which had a dissonance with Indigenous knowledge. Right. So are you saying there, Adrian, the dissonance was that the science did not jive with the Indigenous beliefs, or that the language was not simple enough to for the audience to relate to?
No, what I was, it was your first interpretation.
Oh, okay.
Actually, the language used in the village meetings, which all took place in the villages under under the shade of acacia trees and that sort of thing, quite hot, but was fairly simply explained and people followed that. It's just that what was being talked about didn't gel with people's perceptions and experience of what happens in the ebb and the flow of, I won't get into all the details of the project, otherwise we'd be here all day. But with the ebb and the flow of the water in the inland delta, what we were suggesting was that the diversion of water would not actually make too much of a difference, but that didn't make sense. The idea that you were taking water out and that would not have a consequence just didn't make sense to people. So it needed a lot more time. I learned a huge amount from that experience of how to engage. I would say, I won't say communicate, but try to engage with local communities, with Indigenous communities, to try and communicate information.
Right. So Melissa has a question to you, Adrian. Were you aware of their belief systems and lived experience prior to going in? Perhaps
yes.
More. Oh, okay.
Yes, in fact, because maybe I had been living in the area and working in that area for at least 15 years, and understood not just understood how the functioning of the wetland systems worked. So it wasn't a question of not having empathy with what traditional understandings and beliefs were.
Okay.
So yeah, but I understand where the question's coming from, and it actually is a very valid question. It's a very valid point that's being made, and one that we haven't really touched on, but about, you know, who the messengers are, who you choose to deliver, if I can say, deliver messages, and the credibility of the persons or organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Adrian, that's a big part of strategic communications. The messenger matters, and deeply affects how messages are received. And so that is part of what we will tackle in this course, and I hope it's helpful in helping you bridge some of those gaps in the future. Did anyone else want to contribute a bit about their own experience? Oh, Ian was trying to put his hand up. Go ahead, Ian.
Thank you. 2 points. We've been trying for years with scant success. I think problems are, firstly, it is difficult to identify our target audience. Who drops litter? It could be anybody, from a little child to a seasoned adult, but you can't generalize. How do we identify a target audience? Secondly, and I think this will resonate with just about everybody here, there seems to be a belief in Grenada that if there is a group that identifies with a problem, we can leave the problem to them. I once heard a pastor on the radio. I'm not a religious person, but there was some kind of sermon going on. And he said, we are all the church. Don't leave it to pastors. Don't leave it to people who go to a certain building once a week. I've heard politicians, enlightened politicians, say, if you want to get something done, don't just leave it to us. Liaise with us by all means, but start an initiative to get something done. And we are finding the same. We're a little group, we're passionate. If we put something out on Facebook, or if somebody else puts something out on Facebook about litter dropped, or a beautiful scenic area having building materials dumped in it, then many, many people, getting on for treble figures of people, express horror. But does anybody do anything beyond expressing horror? No. And I think they think, oh, well, there's this group called the Grenada Green Group, G3, that is committed to trying to reduce litter. We leave it to them. Good, they're there. And nobody wants to join the fight, get involved, support, become part of a bigger network.
So I have a little bit of maybe a controversial question for you, Ian. Do they need to join the fight, or is it enough for them to stop littering and stop and talk to the people in their family, their immediate households, and the people they come into contact every day about not littering? Like, so make it so that I no longer litter, my kid, my husband, you know, the people connected to us no longer litter. Is that doing enough? I just wonder if the ask seems so big and unreachable or unattainable that people get put off.
It starts with the individual, and that's a point we make. We ask audiences to make pledges, and the first pledge is, I will not drop litter. You know, starting with something very simple and basic and individual. What I'm thinking of is if you go into particularly pharmacies, but not only pharmacies, you buy a little box of prescribed tablets. The tablets are in their box. They're in their foil in their box, so they're already double wrapped. But the pharmacist finds it necessary to put it in a little plastic bag when the person collecting them has already got a shopping bag to put them in, or a pocket which they will fit because it's such a small item. The little plastic bag is absolutely useless. It's pointless. It's not even useful for 5 minutes, 5 seconds. Yet our attempts to persuade pharmacies, not automatically, not just pharmacies, but they're an example, a good example. To stop automatically issuing plastic bags unless people ask for them has met with absolute failure.
Okay, I don't want to just dive deep down into your issue, but just some food for thought. Have you considered making your messaging to pharmacies and other places that give people like nuisance plastic bags and stuff, making it about their bottom line? Because they pay for those plastic bags,
Yes,
right?
we have considered that. Yes, we use that as part of our argument.
Okay, so maybe part of it is trying to slowly instigate a cultural shift in thought, but
Yes, that's our aim.
also messaging that hits really hard about their bottom line, how much money they can save, and what them taking that small step and saving all that money for themselves means for the country as a whole. I think there have to be like multiple levels, and you have to be really nuanced in your messaging, but we can continue that conversation as the course goes on. I just wanted to, you know, give a little food for thought and just kind of see what you guys had been doing. I saw a hand, but Chris, the hand up was Chris Joseph, right?
Yeah, good morning. Yeah.
Good morning, Chris.
Yeah, thank you very much. I put it on because in the end, so I have a bit of a struggle in terms of communicating and trying to, really convince individuals about all these good practices, best practices, and at the end of the day, the troubles remain the same. And I think in the end, you kind of summarize where perhaps my thoughts were going. So then I put on my hand, because indeed, perhaps we need to evolve. Maybe there is a need now to get to another place of trying to convince behavior change so that at the end of the day, the desired outcomes can be achieved. I think we're dealing with a number of dynamic individual situations. There are generational differences, there are demographic differences. Older people have aspirational things that they have in terms of how they perceive the clean and healthy environment is. That does not necessarily connect with younger people who do not necessarily have a care, but the point is we have to be able to understand what motivates those individuals and how it is we can, so just as how the mobile phone companies, for example, are able to convince us that we need to rush out and purchase the latest handset, even though we have a perfectly working handset.
Exactly.
But all the glitz and everything else convince us that we need to be either with the crowd or we need to get to that. And then we rush out and we do it. And the same thing we do for sneakers and fashion. So the point is we need to evolve in terms of the communicating strategies and stuff like that, be able to involve those key personnel with the skill sets to be able to communicate, to devise up these kinds of innovative ways of communicating so that we can reach those desired target audiences. So the young people who have the spending power. I was once walking behind a lady. She's a professional lady. She was eating something. She was wearing the uniform of this prestigious institution. After she finished eating what she was eating, it was in a wrapped paper. She dropped it in the drain. So then I came up to her And, you know, it was not confrontational. I basically started the conversation by asking her about how her day was going, and we laughed about something. And then I asked her about why it was that she did what she did. And she defended it and said that essentially it is job creation. There are people that are paid to clean the streets and stuff like that. If the streets are clean, then these people will be getting free monies. So the point is, she is helping them by providing work for them to actually do. And if there are multiple people with that perception, then we're not going anywhere in terms of those things that we are contemplating, which at the end of the day may turn out to be superficial, but not really getting to targeting, you know, why
Right.
people are
I mean, you're
motivated to do the
messaging for
thing.
people,
So,
you're messaging for people who think like that is going to be drastically different to your messaging for,
absolutely, I agree
let's
with
say,
you.
young
Thank you.
people. Yeah. Thank you, Chris, for sharing. Go ahead, Natalie.
Hi, guys. So I think this is great that you all are giving us these examples, and please continue to do so over the next couple sessions. What I want to offer, without even talking to my facilitator, but I know she's cool about it. In the last session, we have a little slack. And in terms of our timing, we could maybe try to do as part of that, like a little clinic where you guys talk about some of the campaigns you guys have been working on, separate and apart from those for the NEA that we're working on. And I'm hoping she would not mind giving you some tips what you all could try differently or something like that. So let me just say that we're going to put that on the agenda to have a sort of a communications clinic on the last session.
That's an excellent idea. That's an excellent idea, Natalie. And I, of course, am game. So we will do that. Anastasia, thank you, Natalie, for offering that. Natalie, sorry, Anastasia, can you take us to the next slide, please? And thank you everyone for sharing. I mean, it does give us insight into what we need to work on through the rest of the sessions as well. So I'm glad we spent some time talking through some of the challenges you've been facing. So we talked in session 1, or I shared what some things are we should consider when deciding who to target for our communications efforts. And some of you also shared. I think Hayden shared a little bit on this. Hayden is the person who stands out in my mind, but I'm sure others shared as well. So just do we remember what are some of the things we should consider when deciding who to target for our communications efforts? Anybody? It's okay not to share. I, of course, made notes. So can we move forward to the next slide, Anastasia, please? Okay, so these are the notes that I made, and we can, of course, add to this list. It's not carved in stone. What do we need to consider when deciding who to target? How can this person, group of persons, or institution impact our goals? How much do we know about them, right? That is just like anecdotal, qualitative. I've spent time working with this group, so this is what I know. It could also be quantitative data that maybe you took a CAP survey, and so you have a little bit more information. Hayden offers in the chat that something we should consider is the age of the target audience. Absolutely, I agree with that. Do we have the resources to access the information needed to potentially sway that? So I said this yesterday and explained a little bit, and I'll explain again. Is their liberation tied to our liberation? Meaning, do they benefit in any way from the change we're trying to make? And that is their liberation tied to our liberation comes from an indigenous quote. that says something like, if your liberation is tied to my liberation, then we can work together. But if you have come to help, you are not needed, or something like that. I know I'm not getting the language perfect, but the sentiment is that if you are in this thing with me, if you see yourself as a partner in this, if this issue impacts you too, and you recognize that, then we can work together to make a change. But if you think if you're coming at it from the perspective of you're helping me or trying to make me better myself, but there's nothing in it for you, it doesn't impact you, then you shouldn't be doing this work. And so we want to make sure that the people we're trying to reach see the benefits for themselves, feel, or we're able to sway them to become allies in the fight to make whatever we want to happen. So Hayden helps me out with the indigenous quote. He says, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. Absolutely, right? And I think as the people who are communicating about a particular issue with other people and institutions, we also have to step down off our high horse, so to speak, right? We can be very righteous and self-righteous, like this is the way it has to be, and this is why it has to be that way. I'm trying to help you. Can't you tell I'm trying to help you? Yeah, you're trying to help me, but are we in this together or not? Because if we're not in this together, you're wasting your time. And Melissa shares, all parties should have skin in the game. They also have to recognize that they have skin in the game. And part of strategic communications for some of our target audiences is sharing with them what skin they have in the game, right? How this issue impacts them and impacts them through and through, right? So how does it impact their daily life? How does it impact the way they interact with others? We have to be mindful of that, but it can't be a you thing. It has to be an us thing. Paulette Mitchell, sorry. Paulette shares, socioeconomic status should also be considered when targeting an audience. And that is absolutely valid. Yes. Because you just may use different languaging or different approaches depending on how people relate. Socioeconomic status can impact how people relate to others trying to reach them. And so that's a great point, Paulette. I'm sorry, guys, I'm suffering a little bit in terms of my throat drying out. So we have to be super cognizant of how they benefit, reaching them where they are. Does the benefit to them, is it enough to move them to act? And what might motivate them to take action if it's not? So can we move to the next slide, please? Oh, there's a hand up. Whose hand is up? Go ahead, please.
Michelle, thank you very much for the things that you were just discussing. Just in the context of the target audience. So sometimes, for example, you know, a wonderful campaign in terms of something that is a produce ad or something that is made for terrestrial TV, for example, it has all of the necessary details, but then you're at the mercy of the program producers and so forth relative to terrestrial TV and those other mechanisms, and how they schedule the airing of those things, it misses the opportunity to reach the target audience. So for example, this morning, I was looking at a local TV station, and it was an ad that I think was targeting young children and perhaps parents also. And it was in the context of bullying and issues pertaining to inappropriate touching and so forth. But I think in terms of the messaging, it was directed at the young persons, young individuals, students, but they, I think, were not necessarily looking at that programming that was happening, wherein that ad was played. It perhaps would have been more appropriate relative to a cartoon section, wherein those individuals, they would have been, glued in looking at. But I mean, those decisions are made by other individuals after, the thing has been prepared and passed. So I then wondered in terms of the engagement that can happen. I mean, usually you prepare it, then you have a conversation with the station. They give you a cost, you pay it, and it is at their mercy thereafter. So how do we then deal with those challenges, overcome that? Thank you.
Oh, thank you for asking that question, Chris. So it actually is not necessarily at the mercy of the TV station, right? They would have particular slots that cost a certain amount. And if you're willing to pay for prime time, then you'll get prime time, or you're willing to pay for a particular slot, like, I need my program to air when cartoons are airing, they might charge you a little bit more. If you don't have the budget, right, to pay for more for that programming, then you have to weigh whether or not the juice is worth the squeeze, right? Maybe there's a more effective, cheaper way to reach your audience than having your message for school children played while they're at school and not watching the TV, right? So that's all a part of the building an effective communication strategy and making sure you're leveraging every aspect of it, particularly the products and platforms, in a way that's beneficial to your desired outcome. We want to control as much as possible within our communication strategies, and you can't always control how people receive the information, but in the products you're putting out, how they're put out and when they're put out, you absolutely have control over that. So if a TV station is saying, no, you can't tell us when to play your programming, then TV is not the best platform or pathway to get that message out, right? You can use other messaging where you have a little bit more control. And we'll talk about that at length when we get to that part of the strategy. But that was a great point raised, Chris. And I think we have to start just going into our communication strategies with that kind of mindset. This is my strategy, and I'm going to control as many things as are within my control. And obviously you can't control everything, but what you can, you do, right? And be super clear about that. So you don't have to TV, there are more than one way to skin a cat. And just think of a different way to reach that audience that doesn't have you spending all that money, where you have more control. Does that make sense? Just give me a thumbs up if that makes sense, or if it just felt like I was rambling. Thank you, Chris. So I want to turn to a tool to help you, that I devised to help you really hone in on your targets and figure out, is it possible, Anastasia, to make it any bigger or no? I want to hone in on this communication strategy tool that I developed to help you all work through your targets. And if you can't see it well here, that's okay. When we share screen and we're in the breakout rooms, you'll be able to see it better. For now, I'll talk us through the tool. Yes. So this tool asks you for the person, group, name, their name, and the person or group, their name and their affiliation. It then asks you on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being low and 10 being high, how much does our communications issue affect this person or group? And then we move on to, on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being low and 10 being high again. I guess that's understood. I won't repeat that anymore. How much influence do they have over our ability to instigate or inspire change with respect to this issue? What, if any, then we move to the next column. What, if anything, is most important to this person or group about our issue? How could this person or group contribute to our communications campaign? How could this person or group block or impede our communications efforts? And if we had to, how would we engage this person or group, right? So as Natalie would have shared, I worked with Canary on their regional and local Escazú agreement campaigns, trying to get regional governments to sign on to and or ratify the Escazú agreement. Can you move a little to the left, Anastasia, so I can see the first column? So I filled out the tool using those efforts as an example, as Natalie shared I would, yeah? So it was really good that Chris shared about people targeting the news media, because that's actually my first example. So we turned to Asha Gulston, the producer of Morning Edition, where Fazir Muhammad is the host. And she's the producer of Morning Edition and also, I believe, the evening news, right? How does this, we determined that this issue affects Asha at a level of about an 8, right? Because based on the explanation I'll give in a little bit, it really impacted the way she would bring news or bring about an interesting topic on her show, which was really important to her. And then Anastasia, can you scroll up a little bit so we can see the question? Right, thank you. How much influence do they have over the ability to instigate or inspire change in respect to this issue? I said that Asha had about a level 7, which is, relatively high. And I'll explain that as well. So the reason why I said I gave those figures is because ASHA is committed to giving citizens in-depth analyses of pressing issues, including environmental issues that the government doesn't seem to be taking on board, and few, if any, other local media outlets are reporting on, right? So she wants to report fresh, different news. Not sure if on Morning Edition she is really driving that or the host is driving it, but nonetheless, it's true. And so, and she wants to do have a level of high level discourse on the matter, right? At the time, the Trinidad and to date, I think the Trinidad and Tobago government had not spoken on the Escazú agreement publicly or acknowledged one way or the other if they were considering it, right? Considering signing and ratifying it, right? And we targeted Asha and her morning show in particular. Kanari did, and two other Escazú champions, actually, Omar Mohammed, who will speak with us later today, and Rishi, now Rishi's surname is escaping me, but he's from Equigov. And together, the three institutions made up the driving Escazú champions in Trinidad and Tobago. ASHA could help apply pressure to government officials, senators, ministers, et al., and Ministry of Planning staff, who Kanari was working with behind the scenes because those people monitor her program to see what they're discussing and to gauge citizen interest. How could she impede or block? By refusing to have us on the show or to air any content about the Escazú agreement. Anastasia, can you move more to the right, please? And how could we engage her? So I had a relationship, a working relationship with Asha. And so we leveraged my working relationship. And so we had a relationship in that I had engaged her on other matters in the past, but I have a closer relationship with another key media personality who has a direct relationship with Asha. And I leveraged that connection, my friend, to put me in touch with Asha and kind of plead my case about how important this issue was for them to be reporting on Morning Edition. And I leaned on my friend, the other media connection I had, to follow up with her, right? I followed up, but also, hey, can you follow up with Asha to make sure we can get on the show, to make sure we can have a series of appearances, because we knew that based on past conversations that Ministry of Planning was watching and that they were paying attention closely. Does the example help you understand better how this tool can help you really break down your target audiences? Would you like me to go over another example, or do we think we are good on how to use the tool and how it can be helpful in your small groups? Give me a thumbs up if you think it works. If you think you need another example of how to use the tool, give me a raised hand. I have 2 thumbs up and no raised hands. So should I assume that the consensus is that we understand. I think that is what I'm gonna go with, that you guys understand how to leverage this tool to break down your target audiences. Okay, so with that said, we are now going to move into small groups based on, well, not super small groups, but project groups based on the projects you said you were interested in working on, either in the survey or when Natalie and Aditi polled you earlier. So Anastasia is going to break us into groups. I will be, it's still just 2 groups, correct, Natalie? Yes?
Yes, yes, 2 groups.
Okay, so I will be with one group and Natalie will be with the other group. And what we are expecting you to do is to fill out this tool as a group for your project that you signed on to work on during the course. Any questions, concerns, challenges?
I have one question. When you are deciding on the number based on the scale of 1 to 10, what are you basing that off of?
I guess with each, I'm using my personal experience of the target audience, right? If you have hard data about and understand like their track record to date, obviously I take all of that into consideration. You want to use all the information available to you to make that determination, right? So for me, I use my personal experience and also her track record in how she reported things, to say, okay, I think this is going to be something that's going to be important to her. But you have to use the best information you have available to you at the time. Does that make sense, Aria?
Yes, thank you. I was wondering how far to go. So this will give, at least when we get into the small group, if there's disagreement on the scores, then we can back it up and then as necessary, seek information, data on it.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, concerns, challenges? If not, then Anastasia, you can put us into our groups. Our small group was really quite interesting. So very curious to find out what happened in the other group and to share with you what happened in our group. So Aditi rapporteured for your group, right, Natalie? Aditi, can you share with us what was discussed in your group? Who are your strategic targets? And fill us in, please.
Sure. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen so you can see as I go along. Hoping you can hear me clearly.
Yes, fine.
All right. So initially we targeted the Prime Minister and then we decided might as well go for the Minister of Physical Planning. That might be more reachable fruit. So it was low impact, significant influence. So how much does our communication issue affect the minister? We put 3 or 4. But the influence that they have and our ability to inspire change is very significant. So we issued a 9. We had a lively discussion. So just to share some of our points, what is the most—
Sorry, 1 second, Aditi. Can you share with us what is your group's issue, just so we know?
Oh, yeah, sorry. We're on the mangrove issue, right? Helping decision and policymakers understand that mangrove ecosystems are valuable and should be protected. All right. Yes, so what is the most important thing to this person about our communication issue? So we found out that the biggest mangrove is indeed in the minister's constituency. So that's, I guess, something very notable. The importance of mangroves to save costs and to garner revenue is some points we can highlight to the minister. Save costs from for example, hurricane damage, revenue from tourism. And of course, the point came up that mangroves are relevant to various international agreements and obligations by the government of Grenada. And though international agreements may not be a priority for the minister, funding from international organizations, foreign assistance related to these agreements, obligations might be something that could pique his interest. So the next point, how can this person contribute to a communications campaign? The minister can ideally be a champion for the campaign. He can also give the campaign legitimacy if he attends events or as such. He can also positively influence his peers at the cabinet level, noting that it's difficult for some groups to get to that level, to influence that level. So it reduces the steps to get there. And the minister is empowered by the Physical Planning Act. So he can influence legislation and even make decisions, overturn existing decisions. In terms of how the minister can block or impede our communication efforts. So there can be possible conflict of interest. Job creation, again, versus environmental conservation is the usual suspect. The minister can also block campaign by stating that mangroves are not important. So a very aggressive approach if it comes to that. But if we need to engage this person, how can we do so? There are some options for direct contact, appointment through the constituency day, emails, letter writing. So we have documentation for follow-up. Informal contact with the minister, recognizing it's a small island and people know each other. Yeah, of course, local NGOs can arrange events around which the minister can attend as a main guest speaker, similar with events such as International Day for Mangrove Ecosystems or Sector Day activity. Again, small islands, so we can find allies, friends of the minister to convince the minister, and we can get these persons also who are in cabinet to bring motions to the cabinet floor and get the ministers or other MPs' attention. The last point, a couple last points we have here, include a favorable quote from him in a press release so that he has a political win. Have concerned citizens write letter to the press directed to the minister and send information packages to the minister directly, fact sheets, infographics, things that are easy to digest. So not the entire NEA, but maybe the summary for policymakers. Our second group and last group that we identified, oh, sorry, if you have any questions on that.
No, I don't, Aditi. That's really quite good. You guys went into a lot of detail and I appreciate that. I just was gonna say, rather than go through the steps, the thing for all of your next group, just let us know who you identified as your second target.
Yeah, the second target was the intermediary groups, so the community groups, the groups that can act on the ground and influence decisions based on, pressuring and garnering support.
Society? Those are
civil society, yeah, civil society groups. So we had, for example, Specto, Geo Conservation Network, and I believe the Grenada Fund for Conservation. So their interest in the environment, how they can act as watchdogs, engage in public education, engage with their allies internationally, regionally, to apply pressure to garner support there as well. Yeah.
Really interesting that you thought that so with them it's kind of reversed, right? For the minister, the impact is low, but the influence is high. With CSOs,
yes,
impact is high, but the influence is low.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Michelle, just to interject, Terrence used an interesting phrase. With the community groups, we're playing the long game. Whereas, you either go directly to the minister or you play the long game of using the community groups as an intermediary. So I thought that was good.
Yeah, and I remember that both Brian was, I think, was in my group this time, but both Brian and Terrence are opposed to playing the long game. Yes?
Not opposed, but it can't be the sole purpose. It can't be the sole focus. There has to be something to get it done.
Understood.
Get it over the top.
Understood. Thanks for clearing that up, Brian. But I remember you guys being like, really passionate about, no, that's wrong. So I wanted to, I'm paying attention. I want you to know I'm paying attention to what matters to you guys as well. So thank you for sharing, Aditi. I like that there's great that you took it from two aspects. We identified three targets, and I'll let Melissa take it from there. Melissa? Oh, sorry. Am I just
Yes.
impatient?
Okay, so we started with a very long list of targets, and then we prioritized down to CaneCo, which is a company that...
Hi, Melissa. Sorry,
Yes.
want to just share our project?
Oh, yes, yes. Thank you. We are working on convincing farmers to retain or plant trees on their farmlands to aid in water security and to reduce soil erosion. Can everyone see that? I hope so. Okay, so we started with a very long list, as I said, of target audiences, but we prioritized and came up with these three, which were CaneCo, which I'll go through the categories for CaneCo, but I'll first give you all who we prioritized as our main target audiences to begin. So CaneCo and CaneCo Co-op of Farmers and the Ministry of Agriculture. Now, we said that on a scale from 1 to 10, that the impact or the how does this affect our communications issue? How are they affected by our communications issues was a 7. And we said that quite optimistically. And then we said that how much influence, they have a very high influence. We actually said 8 or 9, but we went with 8 being more conservative. What, if anything, is most important? So we came to that this company would be most interested in the science or the data surrounding our issue, that being the number of trees they would need to plant, where and why, and how it would impact their business and the environment. We think that they would also be chiefly interested in the impact on their reputation with the surrounding communities, because they came into the communities with a certain ideology or reasoning around why they chose Grenada. And so if they were to be seen as depleting or taking away from the idyllic surroundings that they claim to have lauded, that may cause some issues with their public persona. How could this person, okay, so we had the same reasoning for how they could contribute, for both how they could contribute and both how they could, and how they can impede the process. So they have the ability to influence the farmers directly, and in some ways they can set the terms on how the farmers engage with the project, because they are paying them to grow cane, and they're growing their cane to their specified to their specifications. So we said that one way that we could engage with this group was to start with a one-on-one meeting, ideally leveraging existing contacts, to which there was some trepidation. Would Hayden or anyone else like to weigh in and add more context? Hello, can you guys hear me?
I just dropped in the chat because we needed to narrow the reference. So just to let the group know that when we started discussing growing trees on farms is way too broad a topic for this exercise, or maybe even a couple of years work of our CSO. So we decided to narrow it down by crop and also by country, because of course Grenada is a tri-island state. So the discussion ended on, we'd focus on sugarcane, and all the issues of monocropping and land clearing that were related to planting of sugarcane, and only on the island of Grenada. And that's the starting point that got us to identifying the parties who would be the strategic targets of the exercise.
Yeah. Thank you, Hayden. Yes, there was lots of back and forth about, you know, who we would choose, and then who would be most effective for this project. We settled on Kane, and then we had like 15 target audiences initially, and then we had to narrow it down by priority, just saying, you know, if we had to phase the project, who would we start with? And so those were the three we landed on. Very fruitful discussion, I think. Hayden and team can say in the chat whether or not they agree, but it sounds like you also had a very fruitful discussion in the mangrove group. And so we left off our discussion talking about how CaneCo would need lots of data, and we would have to leverage all available data in order to get into a meeting and not be left out of a meeting with them. And so that is such a great segue to our guest speaker, Omar Mohammed. So I will just briefly introduce Omar. I'll share my screen a little bit, and then he will talk to us about leveraging data to strengthen and bolster your communications messages. And then we'll have a little bit of time for questions to Omar. Right, so just a little intro music here. Right, because who feels it? No. Oh, did you guys hear it? No, I didn't share my screen yet. Oh, I did. So you guys should have heard the intro music. Let me get to my slide. Right. So we're here with Omar Mohammed, Chief Executive Officer at the Cropper Foundation. They are doing great work to galvanize citizens or citizen journalists, or empower citizens to become citizen journalists, and then using them to get messages out about different environmental issues. Their work has been really quite powerful, and they've engaged in a number of environmental projects over the last few years using their citizen journalist program. Omar can tell you a little bit more about their other projects. They work with Canary quite a bit. And so without any further ado, I am going to stop sharing screen and turn over to Omar. Thanks again for joining us, Omar.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Sorry if my voice is a little croaky. There's a flu going around. So thanks everyone. Thanks, Canary. I see some familiar faces there. And I will be talking a bit about how the Cropper Foundation uses data in issue-based communication. So for those of you all who might know about the foundation, we've been around since 2000. So we've just celebrated 22 years of working in the Caribbean, based here in Trinidad and Tobago. And we have predominantly worked on issues related to sustainable agriculture, biodiversity and ecosystem services, and sort of overall governance. But over the last few years, we have made a concerted effort, again, driven by data and seeing what's out there, to try and explore some niche areas that focus on development and its relationship with civil society. So we have launched in 2000 a data for development lab, where we are looking at how data science and technology can be applied by civil society for supporting sustainability and development. So we partnered with a couple of folks, UWI, CT Lab, Microsoft, Caribbean, and we're doing a couple exciting things. We just wrapped up a National Geographic funded project looking at how you can combine drones, artificial intelligence, remote sensing, and so on to create tools for small farmers in small island states to assess different conditions on their farm. We're exploring how to digitize public consultation using things like natural language processing, other AI tools, and so on. And we're interested in taking, and we've also launched a data accelerator program for civil society, and we'll be taking that wider Caribbean in 2023, so you can look out for that as well. And of course, we're doing work in natural capital. We launched the Caribbean Natural Capital Hub earlier this year with Answer Merchant Bank and Answer Bank. And we'll be still helping businesses support how they incorporate more holistic sustainability reporting into their work. But I'm here to talk about data, and this presentation, I'll talk about data in three main ways and how we use it. So first, it would be to, of course, define a problem that we're trying to solve through a program or project. Secondly, it would be actually using that data as content in communication. And then finally, using data as a form of measurement. So how do you know if something that you're doing is having an impact on it? And just to define what we mean by this type of communication, you know, it should provide a voice for stakeholders, your beneficiaries that you work for and you work with, to help them communicate their problems. So it's not about what the Cropper Foundation wants to get across. It's really about being a conduit to amplify their voices. It's also about promoting behavioral change. You know, sort of education has its uses, but education without a change in attitudes or practices is a bit of a maybe not good use of resources. They should put on some type of action. And finally, this type of communication should make a case for for positive change. And that, of course, can include both talking and doing, which I think you all just mentioned, you know, long game, plus also short term. You know, there should be as holistic as possible of an approach, and not sort of unless it's part of your strategy, not sort of going down one rabbit hole in one direction. So that's the three things really, three sort of lenses that we'll be looking at this particular approach. And these are the three frames that we'll be using, and I'll give an example of each for each in terms of our project. And Michelle, you just give me like a 5-minute warning, so I don't go sort of rambling on. But you know, many of you all, I think, would know the difference between data and information and knowledge. So data, of course, is raw and unorganized observations. And in many cases, we use data and information to some extent interchangeably when we talk about data-driven approaches and so on. And communication really is taking this information, this data and information, and communicating this in a certain way to generate some type of knowledge or advanced information to the point of putting it in the context, after which it becomes a source of knowledge. And of course, data in particular comes in many different ways. You all know this. It's qualitative, it's quantitative, it's primary data that you go and you find for yourself, or secondary data that someone else collects, and then you can then use and process in a way that makes sense for you. So you know, unless you want to be really pedantic, all these things are sources of input for you. even knowledge for you can be a what we call quote unquote data driven, using knowledge gained from someone else and form your own work, is at least in some instance helping craft your message or your approach in a way that is at least taken other perspectives into consideration. Because again, none of us really are experts. There are always people doing great things, and it's always important to try to learn as much as possible from either the people around you or the people who worked on similar issues. Sorry, folks. So the first lens that we're looking at is how we use communication to provide a voice for stakeholders and how data informs how we create that voice. So under EU-funded project early a couple of years ago, part of the work was around communication and supporting about 30 community groups in Trinidad and Tobago in understanding environmental governance and then supplying them with a communication training and so on to get their voices out. We had done a couple of baseline analyses where that collected quantitative and qualitative data on everything from the platforms that these groups use to how they feel from focus groups about the ability to get their message across. And a lot of the data that came out of that, richest data was qualitative data. So into transcripts and interviews, which we then sort of analyze and realize, wait, a lot of these people have platforms, they're on social media, but they really lacked it was always moderated by someone else. The main news, what they're able to post and technical capacity on social media, and they felt very powerless in their ability to share their knowledge, and they lack confidence in sort of matching up to what they perceived as being sort of quote unquote best practice on things like social media and so on. So we scrapped our entire idea of doing workshops and so on and decided to create the Caribou Environmental News Network, which is a citizen journalism platform that focuses on empowering citizens, regular citizens in communities and CSOs to either become writers or contributors or become trusted sources for other environmental journalists who want to tell these stories closer to communities. So the creation of that strategy was informed by the data that we found when we listened to the beneficiaries and the communities that we were trying to serve. And that resulted, we launched on World Environment Day 2020. And since then, this probably has to update a little bit more. We've had over 100 articles produced. And articles, we mean videos as well, and written articles, many of which were written by community members. Some were written by participating journalists who use them as expert sources. We've had over 100,000 unique article reads. Many articles have been republished on national and international platforms. And we are on a drive to expand in 2023 to at least 5 other Caribbean territories. And we are currently finalizing our strategy to do that, which includes reaching out and talking to CSOs and journalists in different countries to find out what the climate and environmental reporting space looks like. So we're really on a drive to make Caribou the sort of climate environmental news platform for the Caribbean. And that, of course, the whole thing was spurred on by listening and paying attention to the data about what people in communities want in terms of getting their voices out. So secondly, using data as actual content. The Crump Foundation is a steering committee member on the Trinidad and Tobago Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. And for those of you all who don't know, the EITI is the global standard for transparency and accountability in the extractive sector. And in this case, the data actually drove the strategy as well, because there was a lack of data. And no data is also data if you look at it in that way. And civil society around the world has constantly pushed for the incorporation of environmental issues in the CITI standard, which was incorporated in 2019, I believe was the last 2019, yes. So since then, environmental reporting has been incorporated into the global standard, and we have then undertook an approach to create a pile of environmental reporting templates for the extractive companies and state companies to put data, to mainstream data, environmental data into the national EITI reporting, which would then by itself form content that will be made public and disclosed to the population on not just the financial transactions of extractive sector companies, but also the environmental impact. So the strategy was also driven by data, which in this case is a lack thereof, and the data will also form direct content for ongoing communication around the impact of the extractive sector. I know I'm running out of time, Michelle, thanks. And then finally, measuring impact. Of course, this is probably a much more traditional way of using data. So whenever you design a campaign to have impact, issue-based communication, of course, it has to reach people. You have to know how it's reach people. And over the last year and a half or so, Crabbe Foundation undertook an approach to push a food security and food safety campaign with all of the major food stakeholders within Trinidad and Tobago, so government, multilaterals, international agencies, civil society, farmers, and so on. And we worked together to create a collaborative campaign that was informed and contributed to by all of the partners involved. And we started to use primarily on social media. And we created a very, very robust metrics collection program, which we shared across all of the partners, building their own capacity, but also looking at where the messaging has reached. So it's reached, well, this, it's gone over 500,000, so it's reached over 500,000 people through our Facebook page alone, and this doesn't count the cross-posting from the partners themselves. We had a couple stakeholder webinars where we collected post-event data and improved every single time. So webinars actually increased because of that, from just under 100 to over 150 guests per webinar, because we sort of took an incremental approach to improvements. And we also tracked how our editorials did, so we can control the dates that we posted them out, and therefore also increasing how we were able to capture that audience. We didn't collect data on longer term impact, because the food security issue, of course, is not something you can capture in 6 months. But in terms of actual messaging reached, we were able to use that data to adjust our strategy in real time. And that's it for me. Michelle, I think I'm right on time. So those are the 3 examples of how we've used data. And like I mentioned before, we're jumping even deeper into more hardcore data science and technology, looking at how you can utilize other approaches to generate data, like AI, blockchain, and that sort of thing. And we're really excited by the prospects, and I look forward to any questions or comments or requests for collaboration.
Questions for Omar? Thank you so much for sharing so openly about the work you guys have been doing. You probably know I'm a big fan of Cropper Foundation, or I wouldn't keep asking you to speak to these classes. Natalie also echoes my thanks.
Yes, just to also, Kanari, thanks you. I know we tackle you all the time, and we really appreciate it.
Fine.
Yeah, any questions for Omar? Feel free to unmute and ask, or if you're not comfortable unmuting, you can put your questions in the chat. Hello? Oh, sorry, my computer did something crazy.
We're hearing you fine, Michelle.
Okay, great. So if
Chris Chris is trying to ask. Go ahead,
Oh,
Chris.
go ahead, Chris.
Omar, thank you very much for your presentation. And thank you for your cooperation and the work that your foundation has been doing. Fantastic work. And I am particularly interested in the citizen journalist aspect of the work that you all have undertaken. And do you have outreach offices or opportunities for which Grenada, for example, can benefit from? I mean, others above my pay grade would have to make that decision, but I think that there is indeed opportunities to learn and to replicate, and to the extent that those things are possible, well, what is actually possible, and how can we actually benefit in terms of trying to undertake a lot of what it is that you do, but then also in terms of trying to build the capacity in the context of citizen journalism. Thank you.
Yeah, so definitely, like I said, we have a plan to expand to a couple more countries in 2023. So we have someone on board leading that coordination, and I think they're moving slowly up the chain. And the idea is to reach out to Grenada is on the list, and the plan is to reach out to particularly civil society groups and journalists, and have a small focus group, just bringing them together on Zoom to talk about what are the major environmental issues, what is the reporting landscape looking like, and are there any other issues to consider if we were to sort of jump into supporting work in that country. So the plan is that we're looking for maybe about maximum. So again, there's two ways. There's training people in communities or citizens to become journalists themselves. But of course, that is a slightly steep learning too, because it's not just the actual technical bits of writing or making a video, but it's stuff like understanding libel, defamation, all that sort of stuff. But I mean, there are many people who can maybe fit that bill. So we'll also be trying to identify those persons through those community groups, as well as working with journalists to help them work with communities to develop trusted relationships and help people in frontline communities become better sources. So like, let's say you wanted to send a note to a journalist about a particular situation. Let's say something with sand mining, for example. After this, you would know, okay, if you're sending this, you need to send the time that you saw it, maybe time and date, any other details around the situation, who might be responsible, like all those things as a package. So definitely, what I can probably do is ask Natalie and Michelle to maybe send around to you all something from us, and we can then reach out to you when we're ready to sort of make that link, and that'll probably be in early January. So to come together on a quick Zoom call to explore. And we're also trying to find some funding so we can pay people to tell their stories, especially communities or persons from communities. So we're working on that from now until then as well.
Certainly, Omar, we would definitely do that. I see Terrence has a question.
Very quickly, thank you, Natalie, and Omar, thank you for your very insightful presentation. Just a little context, many people may not know, but back in the 1950s and 60s, Grenada had some of the leading journalists in the Caribbean region. Unfortunately, that no longer pertains. We have an atrocious level of journalism here. And I just want to endorse Chris's comments. I know it's not directly in line with the objectives of this workshop or this training program, but I think I'm really excited by the Omar's presentation. And I want to encourage you, you may want to get in contact with the Global Water Partnership Caribbean, GWPC, which is now headquartered at St. George's University, WINDREF in Grenada. And I know they have done some work in terms of environmental journalism and so in the past. And I think that could be a fertile area for your organization reaching out and expanding. And employing the lessons learned from your experience so that it can have a meaningful impact on our societies. Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, definitely, and just to respond to Hayden's comment as well. Yeah, so the outreach is actually multiple streams. So we'll actually be doing a restructuring of the site itself and also the site in here in the chat one time. And so we're actually going to, so the main thrust will be stories, articles, etc. from citizens, CSOs, journalists, but there's also going to be multiple strands as well. So we're going to have, an open call for submissions. So you follow our style guidelines, you send in something, we want to make partnerships with people like GWP, who can send periodic stories which will go in different sections of the site. So it's a full-on, it's hopefully going to be a space where you can get a lot of this information out in a way that is maybe more digestible. And again, it does fit into the issue-based communication, because again, it's really meant to be a place where voices that might struggle to get a platform in a quote-unquote news source or news platform could go directly to this, especially around some of the more sensitive issues of climate and environmental journalism. And I don't know if this is an old hand from Chris or it's a new hand. I wasn't paying attention to the side.
Yeah, thank you, Omar. It's a new hand. So just to endorse everything that Mr. Smith said, and then to also say to you in terms of, I really appreciate, your reference in terms of the role that technology and artificial intelligence and the data analytics and blockchain methodologies and all of that. I mean, it is indeed time that we move away from, the very interesting and colorful adjectives that are used to describe things. And, we really need to get into the science or the evidence-based type of decision-making processes. So I just wanted to single that out and to say that indeed that is the way to go, and really look forward in terms of future engagements with you so that, transformation can happen for the positive. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Omar, so much for doing a great presentation and then sharing so openly with respect to people's questions. Is it okay, Omar, if there are more questions that come up after the session that I forward those to you and you can just shoot back some answers to share?
Of course, that'll be great.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much, Omar.
Thanks, everyone.
So with that, we are going to close today's session. But before we do, I'd like to get a feel for how we're now feeling at the end of the session and give you a little bit of insight into what will happen in on Tuesday, in Tuesday's session. I was going to say tomorrow's session. So just bear with me for a second. Let me share my screen. Oh, I'm just going to take it off. And here we are. Yeah. Okay, so in Tuesday's class, we'll be covering using the data available to us, both qualitative and quantitative data, to improve the parts of our communication strategies that we have started. If we haven't started our messaging yet, but we will get to messaging next week, and also our M&E indicators and frameworks. So that's what we'll be working on Tuesday. Now, I would like to invite you to share with us how you're feeling now at the end of day 2. Feel free to type in the chat or to open your mic and speak. The floor is open. I would like to stop sharing. Aria says she feels like it was a very rich session. Hayden says, good, thanks, but already feeling that I will want a lot more even by the end of the series. Terrence says he feels encouraged. Aria says a lot has been covered. Plus we have the clinic, which was a super idea. Ian says definitely helpful. Anyone else would like to share before we close out? Thank you guys for sharing. I feel very excited. It's moving, I find that the class is moving at a good pace. Well, kind of a rapid pace, actually a little faster than expected, but very, very encouraging that you all are so engaged. Natalie, go ahead.
Right, just to thank everybody for all the useful comments, to thank you, Michelle, and our rapporteurs as well. Poor DT was, like on rapid fires, just to say thanks to all of them. Next session, we will continue with the data, and what I'll be doing between then and now is trying to pull out some key bits and pieces from the Grenada NEA pertinent to these 2 campaigns. So we should be able to make that available to you. And Michelle, of course, will remind us, or I can do it now, that all the presentations, etc., will be on Thinkific, which is the online course platform. So if you haven't signed up for that, please go ahead. I think there was a little issue with it, but I think it was sorted out in case you were having trouble accessing it. Also, I'm not quite sure how we'll do it, but we will try to sort of clean up all of these worksheets and maybe just put everything together as kind of a part of a package. Remember, next year we want to try and do some work towards implementation. So we probably won't share now, but we'll try and clean up stuff and sort of package it towards the end and share, of course, with all of you. Yeah, great. All right, thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Natalie, and I'm looking forward to the next session.